Hi guys, welcome back. EXUK here with another vid. First off, apologies if I'm looking down at you again. Um, new phone case doesn't fit where I used to sit my old one to look, eye line. So please forgive me for this vid. This is another games I've played, and I've been thinking. I always cover role playing games, war games, and a couple of board games, but I've not touched on collectible card games and the like. So this is my attempt to reconcile that with the very first CCG I ever played. I was aware of Magic the Gathering, but after reading various letters in gaming magazines, I was kind of put off of it. And I wasn't all that interested. And it wasn't until a friend of mine, Chris, who I've mentioned in many other vids, came back from university with a new collectible card game from TSR called Bloodwars. And I got to be honest, as a group, sort of like a gaming group, we got quite hooked on this for a while. And the premise of Blood Wars basically was it was the whole Outer Planes thing that second edition AD&D had at the time. Because you had the whole sort of weird, sort of the Outer Planes is some sort of bizarre, surrealistic thing, and there's like this war between the forces of hell and the forces of the abyss called the Blood War. And basically, this card game took that a step further and basically had you as some sort of manipulator of events in the Outer Planes. And you built your deck around the forces you wanted to use. And one of the things I really liked with it, and I've not seen enough of this in other card games, was it had a deck builder built into the rules. As I recall, the cards were things like warlords. I'm going to say minions, but I don't think that was the right word. That was like your regular creatures and things. You had spells, you had events, you had sort of like locations, I guess, planes and locations within those planes. I can't remember exactly what they were called, and artifacts. And I think maybe something else was added in one of the expansions. And you were trying to amass a force that could then attack another player because you fought over these planes of existence or these locations which had victory points. And you basically had to build a deck, and you were allowed so many of, depending on your deck size, like I think it was like 40, 50, 60, 80, I think it went up to 100. Forgive me if anyone still plays this or knows, and I'm remembering this a little bit wrong, but I certainly remember you could build several different sized decks, and each one had a minimum and a maximum per card type. And I do think, even now, if more collectible card games went a similar route, you'd get much more balanced games. So you couldn't just fill it with the most powerful cards possible. You actually had to balance your deck out, and it was really, really well done. And it had another mechanic in that each card had a random result number in the top corner. And if it was a creature or a warlord or something like that, it had a countering strength. So if you had something really powerful, say an avatar of a god, it might have a strength of 20, but its random result would be 0. Whereas you could have something that was a strength 10 and it would have a 10 random result. It always sort of added up to 20, with the exception of one ultra rare legendary card, which was the Lady of Pain, who was a 21-0. And annoyingly, I never got this, but annoyingly, there was like, we'd gone to the shop in Cambridge, and there was like 2 boosters left in the box. I bought one, my mate Big Dave bought the other, and he got the bloody Lady of Pain in his pack, didn't he? And so, yeah, and basically the concept of the game was to basically accrue a certain number of victory points by controlling planes of existence. And some cards would work on the fact that something was of a certain alignment. Maybe it worked against good, evil, law, chaos. And I've got to be honest, we had a lot of fun in this. I think they only did like 2 expansions. There were plans for another one. I certainly remember 3 more expansions being listed in the old TSR catalogue at the time, but they never came to fruition. I think you had the base set, you had one based on the various sort of factions of the Plane of Sigil, like the Dustman and the whatever, I forget them all now. And then I think they had one that was like demigod, that deities and demigods type thing. But yeah, this was a phenomenal game. Really well done for some, considering that you get a lot of card games out there which are generally quite naff in the scheme of things. I've played some fairly terrible ones, or I've collected some fairly terrible ones. And, some of them even by companies you wouldn't expect to have done such a naff job. But Bloodwars was absolutely spot on in every regard. The only sort of thing that killed it for us was, I think, for a couple of the players, they kind of came to realise that CCGs are money sinks. They are money pits, or whatever you want to call it. You're going to spend a fortune on this for no real reward. You're going to end up with a load of cardboard. And they stopped playing. And then you've also got the problem, I find, and this is with any sort of game, whether it's a role-playing game, a war game, card game, board game, whatever, the moment they cease production on it, people lose interest. Because there's only so many ways you can play the same old thing. And once Blood Wars failed to get those next expansions, it just sort of died a death. And Magic sort of took over. It's a shame, because Blood Wars was certainly, looking back on it in hindsight, was certainly a game that had a lot of potential behind it. But I'm guessing for the time, TSR, who were not really known for their business acumen, didn't push it enough, would be my guess, which is why it died. It was competing against Magic the Gathering, and they'd also fluffed another card game that TSR was producing, which was called Spellfire, which I will now deal with, in a minute. And Spellfire was awful. At least with Blood Wars, the cards looked really, really nice. They were well produced. Now, Spellfire was the complete opposite. Everything about it was cheap and nasty. And it was, it predated Blood Wars. I don't know by how long, a year, maybe 6 months. I honestly don't know. But it was kind of the opposite. In Spellfire, I don't really know that there's any concept behind it. Basically, you had locations within the various D&D settings. You had characters and monsters, magic items, spells, events, and they were really cheap and nasty looking card designs, but they just reused established artwork. A lot of it Clyde Caldwell's artwork, I think, as I recall, and some of the things were just sort of screenshots of a corner of a map of Faerun, or that old hex map you had of Greyhawk Adventures. And the idea was basically you sort of battled. If I recall correctly, you had to set up like a pyramid of 3, 2, 1 cards, and you had to sort of like fight down the pyramid. I think that's right. Bear with me. It's been over 25 years since I played it. But you basically had to fight over these locations, and so many won. A friend of mine at the time, Eddie, we were the only people that bothered with it. We gave it a shot, and quite frankly, it was useless. As I say, it looked cheap and nasty. The gameplay wasn't there. They'd obviously just cut costs by reusing the same old artwork and the map segments and everything else, just for the artwork. You could build decks based on themes. You could pick up Dragonlance cards, for example, with characters and Draconians and what have you. You could do sort of the same with Forgotten Realms and what have you. But it didn't have the same feel. And I don't know how many expansions that got. I want to say it was a base set and about 5 or 6 expansions. but Blood Wars was an awful lot better. TSR was not one to do collectible games like this. They even did, I think it was called Dragon Dice, which was a collectible dice game where you had different factions. I think it was something like undead, humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, and goblins, and different color dice represented a different faction, and they were different. They weren't numbered; they were symbols, and depending on the size of the dice was how many points it was. Oh God, it was awful. I did end up with a starter set, and I did buy a friend a starter set, and he just put it in a drawer and never touched it. It was still sort of there several years later, still sealed. TSR didn't have a good run on these sort of collectible things. They should have just stuck to role-playing games. But what they did do, Blood Wars was great. And if you ever sort of see, the starter decks were 2 decks combined, and they basically, with a little bit of, I was going to say corrugated them, but it's not. You know where the cardboard's been seared, so you can just tear it apart. You basically, the starter came as 2 decks, so you use one for you and one for your friend to play. And if you ever see, and sometimes you see them on eBay cheap. Sometimes I even remember we had a shop in Cambridge. It was just like a newsagent's random sort of bookstore sort of thing, and they got a bunch load of them about 3 or 4 years after the game ended, and they were putting out these Blood Wars packs and boosters for like £1 each. And if you ever see it, I really do recommend it. They even did like a little book with it as well that gave you a list of all the cards and the rules, and it was much better than the little rule book you had. Blood Wars had the opportunity to be a really good game if they'd have kept it going. So, but yeah, I recommend if you see Blood Wars, even if you pick up the starter decks and play them. Awesome sauce. Spellfire, Dragon Dice, forget them. So, that's just my little chat this evening. Had you ever played those games at all? What were your thoughts? I would really be interested to know what people who play collectible card games think of games that basically tell you what you can put in your deck. As I say, Blood Wars basically said you can have so many warlords, so many whatever it was, monsters, so many locations and so on. And it really, really worked. You had much more balanced gameplay as opposed to something like Magic that says you can play whatever you want. So if you played it, what did you think of that? If you played Spellfire, I'd be interested to know, your thoughts on that. How come that did better than Blood Wars in an odd sort of way? Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to me waffle. Hopefully next time as well, I can get the phone to basically sit where I want it to sit. But until then, thank you for watching. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel. And until then, take care, guys, and good gaming.